Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining. Thanks so much for the invitation. Thanks for having us.
Thank you very much. Yeah, well, I'm looking forward to this.
Likewise.
So how are we going to kick this off? Because neither of us is interviewing the other, and you and I have spoken about Islamic finance and Bitcoin before, so where do we start?
Where do we start? I guess we could start with just making the basic case for why I think, and I'm sure you think, Bitcoin makes sense from an Islamic perspective, from an Islamic finance perspective. And for me, the basic idea is straightforward. In Islam, riba is forbidden. So earning money from interest on money, selling the time value of money is not forbidden, is forbidden in Islam. And most people just take that for granted, and they just assume that it's a part of Islam that is sort of outdated and we can't really live with it in the modern world. But I think there's a very good reason for trying to understand why it is prohibited and how it is active in today's world. And I think the most important thing to see is when you look at government money, just the regular government money, it's got riba baked into it, into the process of creating it. So even if you yourself are not taking part in interest-based lending, if you're not lending or borrowing money at interest, if you're using government money, you are taking part in interest lending because the money itself is created through the process of interest lending. So fiat money, government money all over the world gets created when a new loan is issued. And so it is necessary to take part in riba just by the mere existence of the money, because for its existence, for it to come into existence, it needs to first be lent into existence using interest-based lending. So this is the sort of thing that most people just don't think of because it's so prevalent all around us. Everybody uses government money. We assume it must be okay. But realistically, I don't see how it can be defensible because there's riba involved in the creation of this money. And I think the only way that I could defend it, the way that I would explain this is, well, in Islam, if you find yourself on an island, on a deserted island where there's nothing to eat except for wild pigs, then you can see that it's okay to eat the wild pigs because the alternative is that you starve. But if you find cows on the island, then it's no longer okay to eat the pigs anymore because now you have an alternative. So I think this is similar. I think that before Bitcoin was invented, you could argue that the harm from not using government money was far too big, far larger than the harm of using government money. So therefore, it is acceptable for a Muslim to use government money because the alternative is far worse. But now that Bitcoin exists, I think that excuse doesn't wash anymore. And I think if you care about your religion, you should really seriously consider moving away from the dollar and the government currencies into Bitcoin.
So we're not on a desert island anymore. I mean, we have this alternative available to us. And yet, when you speak to a lot of ulama, a lot of the scholars, they will say Bitcoin is haram because of this FUD and that FUD. And we know what the usual FUD is. You know, they talk about it's not guaranteed by a government, it's not backed by anything, it's volatile, it doesn't have intrinsic value, all the usual arguments that we hear, all of which have a sound rebuttal. And I don't think it's necessarily what we want to do here because everybody here, mostly everybody here is a Bitcoiner. So they know these arguments. But what I find fascinating is that we've had 60 years of modern Islamic finance. And during that time, we have not moved on from fiat financing. So all we're doing in this industry is reverse engineering conventional debt based on fiat money and fractional reserve banking. So every time an Islamic bank enters into a financing contract with a customer, it's creating new money exactly as a conventional bank would create new money. And this is the amazing thing to me, is that we still haven't got past this received wisdom that we hand down from year to year, from generation to generation, that this is the way to do economics, this is the way to do banking. And now this new thing has come along, Bitcoin, and still the ulama are sitting there and saying, no, I think this Bitcoin thing, I don't really understand it, so I'm just going to say it's haram, which seems to me a bizarre way of going about it.
Yeah, I think it's really puzzling, and it's sad, and I think there's echoes to the treatment of the printing press historically, where Unfortunately, a lot of religious authorities historically have just taken the easy way out of just thinking, if it's new, then let's just say no. Let's just say that it's forbidden. The conservative idea here seems to be the safer option for the sheikh, because you don't want to be the one who says something is okay and then people use it and they get hurt, which I believe is a very destructive way of reasoning, because instead of trying to understand things for what they are and trying to reason about whether they're good or bad, you just go with this silly heuristic wherein I'm going to do what covers me from responsibility, what is most conducive to me protecting myself from reputational damage. And so as a result, I believe it's a massive problem, because the Muslim world is missing out on this revolution. It's been 10 years that I've been hearing people issuing fatwas about Bitcoin being haram. And yet here we are 10 years later. What has happened? The price of Bitcoin has gone up about 100-fold. And so the person who wants to get into Bitcoin today is going to get 1% of the Satoshis that they could have gotten if they bought Bitcoin 10 years ago. So the user experience for Bitcoin is drastically affected by when you start using Bitcoin. It's different from other forms of technology. If you start using Facebook today, or if you used Facebook 10 years ago, you are getting the same Facebook today. It's the same user experience. Same is true for Google, the same is true for Apple phones, the same is true for most technology. You join it today, you get the same thing. Bitcoin's not like that. If you joined 10 years ago, you managed to buy your Satoshis at 100,000 Satoshis per dollar. Today you get 1,000 Satoshis per dollar. So it's an entirely different user experience in terms of what you can get it. And it's really sad to watch people have this idea where we're waiting for the whole world to adopt it, and then we will join only late. Because
we're followers, we're not leaders.
Yes, I think this is truly the sad thing about it.
This is very sad, and I'm going to add a little bit of balance to that, because, and I see one or two scholars in the audience now who are very pro-Bitcoin. And, although on the one hand, the sort of establishment ulama have, and who typically are associated with a government, they have been either neutral to negative on Bitcoin. We are seeing some young, financially savvy, tech-savvy scholars who have recognized Bitcoin for what it is, and what I believe to be the most Islamic form of money ever invented, even more so perhaps than the gold dinar, which we had for 700 years, that led to a golden age of Islamic civilization, a low time preference that led to advancement of science, of astronomy, of architecture, of culture. All of these things come with low time preference. And I think we'd have a group of young, savvy scholars who are recognizing Bitcoin for being an Islamic form of money and a worthy successor to the gold dinar standard of 700 years. So I think that's a little bit of balance. We could argue that, yes, there are some who are causing harm, to Muslims, to the Muslim Ummah, by holding us back. When Bitcoin was 1,000, you say buy now, and they don't do it. It's 10,000, you say buy now, they don't do it. 30, 70, 100, they're still saying no. And they're causing immense harm to people by saying no. So I think at some point, the people will adopt it naturally, and the scholars will have to follow suit.
I think so too. And sadly, we have a lot of examples from Islamic history of this happening. The internet, when it first came about, everybody said the internet was haram, which, is laughable. When you look back now, it's ridiculous. It's a bunch of wires where you can send data. And so the idea that this could be haram is functionally no different than saying that speaking is haram, because you're just communicating data with speaking. You're communicating data when you're using the internet. And yet, the conservative mentality is that, well, something bad can be done with the internet, so therefore let's just make it haram. Same was true with the camera. For many years, decades even, many scholars said the camera was haram. People were told to destroy all the pictures that they had, all of their family pictures. They destroyed them at a certain point in time. And then the camera went everywhere and people gave up and they accepted it. And now nobody thinks of the possibility that photography could be haram, because it's just technology. It's a very simple technology that doesn't really change anything about how you behave religiously as an individual. You can use it for good, you can use it for bad. So I think the same thing is going to happen to Bitcoin. And I think there are no good arguments for why Bitcoin would be haram. And I'm curious, what do you think are the most prevalent arguments on this regard. What is the most common idea that scholars would present about why Bitcoin is haram from your experience?
The two that I hear most often are, number one, no intrinsic value, and number two, it's too volatile. So let's answer those two.
Yeah. Well, with the intrinsic value, I think the answer is that nothing has intrinsic value. Value is not intrinsic to things. Value is subjective. We give things value by deciding that we want to value them. And so there was a point in time at which oil had no intrinsic value, had no value. It was negative value. You had to pay people to come and take oil from your land in order for you to be able to build on the land, because it destroyed the quality of the land. So we went from a world in which we gave oil a negative value to a world in which we gave oil a positive value. And now oil is extremely important and extremely valuable. But what has changed? Nothing intrinsic to oil has changed. Oil is still the same chemical substance, but it went from having negative to positive value because our conception of the value has changed. This is true for oil, it's true for gold, it's true for government money, it's true for houses, it's true for apples, oranges, it's true for cars, it's true for everything. We decide that we give it the value, and the value is not something that is installed in the thing, it's not something that's inherent into it. It depends on how we relate to it. So when we figure out that we can use the oil, its value goes up. When we figure out that we can use things in a certain way, the value that they present to us increases. So Bitcoin doesn't have intrinsic value, just like nothing has intrinsic value. We see the value in it. Now, the fact that it's volatile, I think, I don't see how that could be a characteristic for making something haram, because it's a matter of degrees. Everything is volatile up to a certain point. There's degrees of volatility. So where do you draw the line? And how do you define the volatility in a way of saying this is what is permissible, this is how much maximum drawdown you can get into before the asset becomes haram? And I don't think that makes sense. Stocks can go to zero, bonds can go to zero, all kinds of financial assets can be very volatile and they can go to zero. But that's just what the market does. So I don't see why that would be considered a problem with it, right?
So I think on the volatility side, the other thing is that Bitcoin is volatile on the upside. Its long-term trend is appreciating against every other currency, including the US dollar. And people often forget that. They say, oh, it's moving up and down every day like this. Yeah, but how's it moving over 10 years? That's the thing that you guys need to understand. So that's one thing that they fail to. And on the intrinsic value point, one of the arguments that many Muslims use is that money must have corporeal existence. Yeah. Right? It's got to be a commodity. It's got to be real. It's got to be something I see, touch, and feel. So they point to this particular hadith, which is that 6 types of money are mentioned: gold, silver, wheat, barley, dates, salt, and they may only be exchanged hand to hand, meaning spot values only. And people misinterpret that hadith. They think it means that these are the only types of money that are allowed. In fact, what it's saying is things that may be deemed as money should be exchanged hand to hand at spot value. In other words, you can't charge for future cash flows, which is riba. It's creating money from money or money from nothing, which is ironic because that's exactly what Islamic banks do, right? Every time they enter into a credit transaction, every time they enter into commodity murabaha particularly, they're doing a proxy for a loan with interest. I see some people smiling in the audience. I don't know whether they're smiling because they disagree or because they agree. I'd like to know afterwards. Please come and talk to us.
Yeah. No, I think I presume I would agree with you that the emphasis here is not on hand-to-hand in a literal sense of actually using the hand. I think what is meant by it is spot trading, that it is money that is a final cash settlement of transactions, that it doesn't involve future liabilities, future obligations, that it's just a thing that clears trade. And that's how we understand money, in that it is a present good rather than a future credit liability. And so by that standard, in fact, Bitcoin really excels because Bitcoin leaves no room for ambiguity about ownership, which is the case that happens with fiat money because, in fiat money, how much money does the bank actually have on hand? Not as much money as the liabilities. So in a sense, you deposit your money and then the bank lends out the money that you've deposited. And so at the same time, the bank gave the money to a borrower and also told you that the money is available for you. And that's That's the problem in Islam, in that the money is not, the ownership of the money is not clear, and that the banker is essentially double spending the money by spending it to make it available to the lender and to the borrower at the same time. Well, Bitcoin is really a technology to prevent that, because every 10 minutes you get a full audit of the entire network and you're able to see who owns how much. So there's no ambiguity about the ownership. You've got the private key, you've got the coins. You don't have the private key, you don't have the coins. There's no way at the protocol level to bake in the kind of ambiguity that is baked into the fiat money system, wherein these coins are mine, but they're also available for him if he wants to come and withdraw them. And the bank is going to figure this out because they're smart enough to know that him and I are not going to show up at the same time. That's how fiat works. That's how fiat doesn't work. That's how fiat always implodes. And that's not how Islam wants money to be treated, and that's also not how Bitcoin does it. So I think there's a very similar way in which they treat this idea, which is, in my opinion, it's the Islamic approach, but it's also the proper engineering approach. If you were building money from scratch, you don't want to make money ambiguous. You don't want to make it so that two people can fight over the same money. You don't want to make it so that the bank is issuing more liabilities than it has obligations, for two reasons. A, it's fraud, it's immoral, it's theft. And B, and this is the economic argument, putting aside the moral argument, the economic argument is, why are they doing this? They're generating more money. Why do they need to generate more money? We don't need to generate more money. The money supply is always enough, whatever it is, and all that is needed is for the value of the money to increase as people increase demand for it. So who benefits from generating more money, from increasing the supply of the money? The people who are able to generate and print that extra money, essentially the banking system. So it's good for the banks to be able to create that money, but it's not good for the economy. The idea that we're better off because banks are able to create money out of thin air is fiction. It's in fact extremely dangerous, and it's the exact opposite. The fact that they create the money out of thin air is what causes the money to fluctuate, and it causes the business cycle, and it causes those crashes. And you don't fix that with more money printing and with more inflation. You fix that by ending the money printing and ending the money inflation.
You mentioned just earlier about the existence of money. Is it a real thing? What is money that sits in your bank account? I think Muslims are starting to wake up to this, because particularly if you're in a place like the UK, which is where I'm from, Muslim organizations, mosques, charities, they are finding that the banks are gatekeepers to their own money. And we see this in the international markets as well. So we know that $7 billion of Afghanistan's own reserves was held in US banks. And when the Taliban came to power, the US wouldn't release that money to them. And that was a particularly severe winter, and people starved over that winter because they didn't have access to their own money. If that's not theft, I don't know what is. So I think Muslims are starting to wake up to this, even though there's a lot of FUD about Bitcoin not being Sharia compliant, about Bitcoin not being real, not having intrinsic value, being volatile. Actually, when they look at what their banks do to them, and the fact that every time they go and withdraw some money, they have to sign a bunch of forms, they realize this isn't even my money anymore. The moment I put it in a bank account, first of all, it's digital. It doesn't exist as something real and corporeal. But secondly, they don't give it to me unless they're satisfied with my explanation and what I'm going to do with the money. The only way I can send money to Gaza for medicines and aid on the ground is through Bitcoin right now. Every time I've tried to send it through normal banking rails, it gets blocked in some way. And that's not because it was going to the wrong place, whatever wrong means. It's because they don't want you to send your money that way. So that's why I think Bitcoin is freedom money. It's actually more real than whatever else we have in the world right now.
Absolutely, I entirely agree. And I think it's more and more people are waking up to this, that it's not your money if it's fiat, because first of all, you don't control it. So first of all, you have to offer an explanation every time you want to use it. But even beyond that, it's not just about why you want to use it. They don't just care about that. They also care about your general behavior. You can get debanked and you can have your money confiscated for all kinds of things. And we're seeing this becoming more and more popular. We saw in Canada how it happened to the truckers a few years ago. And we saw how it happened to Russia, how it happened to Afghanistan. And it can happen at any point to any country. So I think this is something that's very important, particularly for people who are rich, to think about it, which is that you think you're rich, but if all of your assets are in fiat or fiat-based assets, then they can all be taken away just like that. Look at all the Russian oligarchs that had all of their assets taken away. You get your stocks, your companies, they can be taken away from you. Your bank accounts can be taken away from you. Your stock trading account can be taken away from you. All of that stuff can be confiscated and it can be taken away from you, which essentially means it's not really your money. It's money that you have conditional on good behavior. You have to meet the demands of other people in order to continue to be able to spend the money that you think of as your money. So if you don't have Bitcoin, you don't really have money. You've got brownie points, behavior points, where you're rewarded for nice behavior, like a kid in kindergarten. It's not really money. That's not what money is. Money is what you own. You can do with it whatever you want. And if you can't do with it whatever you want, it's not really money. So think about that, and then think about the people who are in charge of it, and think about the agenda that the U.S. government has, the U.S. foreign policy, the way the U.S. foreign policy is changing, and the way it changes with every election. And you realize this is a massive risk that most people are not really factoring in. They think that we're just living in this world where property rights are protected and whatever we want we can have. I don't think it's true. I think unless you own Bitcoin, you don't really own money.
So I think we've got less than 5 minutes, in fact, about 3 minutes. So what I want to do is talk a little bit about low time preference. I believe that Muslims are a fundamentally low time preference people, or at least they should be, because we're a people who believe in an afterlife, and we believe in storing up good deeds in this life for the next one. So that's the ultimate expression of low time preference. And I wonder how you see Bitcoin as a sort of psychological nudge, something that accords with the principles of Islam, of stewardship of the planet, of sustainability, of long-term sound investment decision-making, and so on.
Yeah. I think this is a great question. It's something that's... Excuse me? Can you hear me?
We just lost the mic. Do you want to...
All right, I'll just use this. So I think this is a great question, and it's something that is one of the biggest surprises that I've come across in the Bitcoin space, just how often you see the experience of people being changed by getting into Bitcoin. It's almost a joke at this point, but it's only funny because it's true, because it carries a lot of truth to it, which is people get into Bitcoin and they stop drinking, they stop doing drugs, they start stacking Satoshis instead of it, they start thinking about starting a family, they start thinking of settling down, becoming much more future-oriented in their actions. And it's something I noticed myself, and it's something that I keep hearing from many, many Bitcoiners from all over the world, that once you're able to save for the future, this is how I explain it, at least in my work, once you're able to save for the future, once you're able to provide for your future self, then you have a much better way of thinking of the future. So you start discounting the future less. So your actions become fixated on the future. You start fixating on how to make the future better rather than just thinking about the present. And seeing the sort of transformation this does to people really gives a whole new perspective on religion. Because when you see this, you see how basically when people start thinking long-term, they start acting in a way that's more moral. And you see the parallel, which is that's what religion is trying to do. Religion is essentially trying to lower your time preference. So don't just act out of impulse right now. Control your impulses and act in a way that is beneficial for you in the long run. And that ends up being the way that's more moral in terms of your action. So you don't steal now, because even though you steal now, that's a good reward for stealing today, there are likely negative consequences in the long term. And so you learn to get over the desire for the pleasure and the satisfaction in the present, and you sacrifice them for the future. And if you get down that path of prioritizing the future and thinking more and more about the future, you find yourself behaving in an entirely different way. In a way that's more moral, in a way that's more productive, in a way that is more future-oriented. And I think it meshes in very, very nicely with religion in general, with Islam. And you see this with other religions as well. You see that there's a very strong Christian Bitcoin community. There's a strong Muslim Bitcoin community. It's startling how people from all faiths see metaphors and analogies and parallels between what Bitcoin does to them and what their religion does to them. And I think this is something that's going to become more and more prevalent as more religious people get into Bitcoin, because I believe what we see in our world today, a lot of the things that religions are not happy about, a lot of the things that religions tell you not to do, the breakdown of the family, the breakdown of society, the high time preference, immediate gratification culture, a lot of that, I believe, is a result of the fact that money is broken. Because money is broken, people can't provide for the future. People become present-oriented. They seek immediate gratification, and they forget about the future, and they don't provide for the future. And I think this is massively destructive. And I believe this is the most profound transformation that Bitcoin is going to make in our world. And I think it's going to blow people's minds just how different the world's going to be after a couple of more decades of Bitcoin.
Yeah, I think we've run out of time, but if anyone's interested, both Saifedean and I had a very nice chat on this about 2-3 years ago on your podcast, The Bitcoin Standard.
Yes.
So I think we go into a little bit more of a deep dive on some of these issues. But thank you very much for listening to us, and we look forward to catching up with some of you later.
Cheers. Thank you.
Is your company ready for the next evolution in financial strategy? Bitcoin for Corporations is your partner in securing the future of your business. With exclusive membership benefits, our comprehensive masterclass, and a network of trusted service providers, we provide the insights and resources to help you incorporate Bitcoin into your financial strategy, ensuring stability and long-term value. Strengthen your business. Innovate with confidence. Bitcoin for Corporations, protecting your treasury and positioning you for the future.